good afternoon, everyone. It's just right after 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get things rolling here. We're really excited about this opportunity. Just to kind of bring everybody up to speed as to how we came to this point. As many of you are aware, we have been invested quite a bit over the last couple of years in just ensuring not only that our agencies are able to have successes, but they're able to, evaluate those successes and also be able to communicate those successes out throughout our state, but also throughout the country and just within their own local community as well. And one of the things that has come to the table quite often is the opportunity to show not only taxpayers, but just the general community as well. What is the return on investment for the programs that you guys already operate on a constant basis? We have a couple of long-term plans with this opportunity. First and foremost is, again, just to give agencies a new tool, give them an opportunity to understand some different ways to calculate what their successes are, but also to really set ourselves up for the future and going forward, and what we're able to really look at as a state in showing that community action is that constant opportunity for successes for both the communities and for the state as a whole. So I'm really delighted to have this. We are going to have this session twice. We're going to have it today and I believe Thursday. Is that correct? No, am I right? Okay. So we'll drop a link in there too if you attending today and would like some other of your staff members to attend that second one. Our first part is just really to get this information out. Our goal is based on these two meetings and the interest that we get from different members is how do we take that and begin to work on a 6-month project, probably more like a 5-month project to gather the information that we need to really come to the conclusion with our project. But in the meantime, what we want to do is have the opportunity for everybody to learn about this topic specifically around how it can help you at your agency. So this is our SROI, or social return on investment. For many of you that have been around quite a while, you may recall that the return on investment actually used to be a part of our Roma curriculum. It was located on the very end of that curriculum, and it was used as a way as once you began to go through the Roma process and be able to identify, what was an outcome and what was an output, and be able to do that process, that you're able to go and therefore use a dollar value to that, really hit home what those results are. Many of us are very aware that, many of the conversations that we have, especially here in Sacramento and in DC, a lot of times that's where the conversation leads to is you're given this many amount of dollars, and what does that mean? What is that really able to allow you to do both as a community and as with our individual families that we serve? So that is what we're going to do now. I just really wanted to come on and say I appreciate everybody being here. We are going to send out some more information for our second session so we can get additional folks to join. But again, ultimately our goal for today is just to bring the idea to the table and give people an opportunity to understand more about what return on investment really looks like. So I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate you guys giving your support. I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence. And he's going to introduce, I believe, a really good friend of mine, Frederick Richmond. Fred and I kind of go, I say way back in my terms, because he was one of the first ones that I got to know in this network, and we have trained together and been all over the country together, and had the opportunity to do a lot with the community action over the years. And so I'm really excited to have him here and have him within the California network. Not only working with some of our agencies directly, but also, working with us here at Cal Kappa to bring this to the table and to bring other projects around our results and looking at our outcomes and what all that we do. So, Fred, without further ado, I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your time to do this project. And I'll turn it over to Lawrence and let him take the next step. Thanks, Lawrence.
All right. Thanks, David. And I don't want to belabor the fantastic words that David had for Fred and this program. Couldn't say it any better myself, but I am your point person here for moving forward with the program. So I'll be helping to coordinate. So if you have questions about what's going on, obviously David is a subject matter expert here, and you can channel any of your inquiries through me. But before you have questions, you need to get some information. And Fred Richmond is probably one of the best people in the network to receive this kind of training from. So Fred, without further ado, I'll pass things off to you and we can start learning about the social return on investment.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence and David. I recognize a few folks here. I see Jim Masters, Critica, David Jimenez. Jim, are you fishing today or what? I'm sure you get that a lot. All right. So, obviously I've probably met some other folks here that I recognize the names too. So, thank you all. As David mentioned, the original history of the Roma training was a 1 day, then it became a 2 day, then it became a 3 day, and the 3 day was the return on investment part. And the irony in that, it was of all the 8 modules, that was probably the one that people liked the most. And the problem was, it was designed to be a way of essentially summarizing all the work that went into it and applying it into a tool that could benefit, community action, for that matter, any agency. So when we realized we couldn't get people to do the 3 days, which they used to do at one time, we basically eliminated it, which was, there it goes. So long and short of it is, I have pulled it back a few years ago. And personally, I think it's an important element. If you wanted to equalize in terms of the business world and things like that, using some of those tools, et cetera, we'll get into that in the material. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is, this is a large slide deck. It's really designed as an orientation, okay? And in essence, Lawrence and David, they'll be posting this online through, I guess Lawrence will handle that through the CalCappa site for those who attended. There's 93 slides. Obviously, I'm not gonna, we'll be here all day. But what I want to do is get the essence of it. And the other thing is, please feel free to jump in. I'm okay with that. And at the end of this, maybe summarize. There is a slide to say what's the next steps. And I want to be able to talk about that, because this is more than a training. This is, the project is to really build a model for all the agencies in California that could be used to help tell their story in a different way, okay, and things like that. And also validate all the work that went into Roma. Why do you do it? Here is part of the reason why one does that. So Lawrence, I guess either way, I could control the slides or you can control them, doesn't matter to me.
Why don't you go ahead? That way you've got, your
Okay.
own flow.
Okay, so let's see here, share screen. Okay, and I think I'm here. Okay, can everyone see this here? Just give me, okay, I see a head shaking. Great, thank you. All right, let me bring this to where I want to go here. There we go. Great. Okay, and there we go. It's just moving the faces off so I could see my own slides. Okay, so basically, this is the material. Just so you know, most of you, I think, somewhat know who we are. My organization, you see it at the bottom, there's the Center for Applied Management Practices. We've been around 25 years. We are the folks that actually developed Roma. And frankly, we also developed, in conjunction with some other folks, the national performance indicators that became obviously part of the whole way we do business and community action. The other thing too is, you'll notice there it says on the website, eLogic model. For our first 15 years, we were research, evaluation, training, strategic planning, data analysis, and then we would help teach fundamental management to not only just community action, but nonprofits in general. And then we got interested in technology, software, and about 10, 12 years ago, we basically began to learn the software business. And we do have software, it's called eLogic, well, today eLogic Genesis, eLogic Model. And there is one agency in California that has just begun to implement it, and that is Communify in Santa Barbara area. So just want to let you know that, full disclosure, that is a part of us as well. So moving ahead, basically social return on investment, how agencies can value services and results and demonstrate impact. to funders, the public, and other stakeholders. So I broke this down into 6 different modules for purposes of organizing. And essentially, the first thing to think about is, how do we integrate basic fiscal practices into our service delivery system? So my observation over the years is that first bullet is that for so many folks, fiscal and programmatic are separate. People are not seeing this together. We're in the more for-profit business world, they're fully integrated. So, and what I've seen, and again, whether that may be your experience or not, is that when budgets are developed, people think of them as, this is what I have to spend. But people from, frankly, an accounting perspective, don't fully know what it actually costs to produce and deliver those services, which is one half. And the other half is, what does it cost to produce the results? And that type of thinking should be in our agencies. And I think it ultimately, you'll see, at least my judgment, would ultimately benefit what we do. Okay. Interestingly, of course, we have probably a combination of local government that would subcontract out for services. We also have the nonprofit sector. And basically, if you're a nonprofit, I think most of you probably know this, the IRS considers you a business. So that keyword business, which implies that there are certain rules that we must follow to be a successful and viable organization. If you look at the history of what we did for many years, we reported outputs, services, right? We spent the money in these folks, and this is what they got. And the fact is, we had quietly also been collecting other data that could have been used to assess the organization's, efficiency and effectiveness, which is fundamental to running a business. So I know that there's probably a combination of people here attending that could have been private sector, healthcare, but there's similar responsibilities in human services that sometimes that are overlooked. So if we think about how we've always operated, we were a grant or contract driven system, and we were paid for delivering the services rather than on the impact. And that is still a legacy. And we're still learning how to move beyond that. Today, what we're looking for are the type of what we do produce, and that is in our theory of change, the national stability, economic security, self-sufficiency. So the question is, what can we do with the agencies themselves in terms of the tools and the skills to do 2 things? And I want to emphasize it. It's not only to demonstrate it, but it's to communicate as well. In other words, we don't want to keep it a secret. And we need to teach people that what we do is important for the fabric of holding society together and things like that. So we're talking about, at the end of our thinking, not only programmatic and physical accountability, but sound business practices as well. And that is still hard on some degree in the nonprofit world. And I'm not limiting this to community action. Okay, so what we're thinking about is a couple of terms introducing and how this came about. Cost benefit, and we'll get into that, and we call the SROI. I honestly hadn't seen until someone frankly introduced me to it. I was familiar with return on investment, but I was not familiar when you put the S in front of it, which gave us a certain latitude. So the social return on investment is a tool that we can use. Basically, cost benefit and ROI are acceptable standard business practices. And what we're trying to do is adapt it to our own benefit to better describe and communicate our story. So the S, as we'll see, the social gives us additional latitude in explaining what we do, why we do it, how well we do it, the value and the impact of what we do. So here's the foundation. We're talking about I'm just going to move something. There we go. We're talking about certain things that are musts in this. One, we identify and document services or interventions provided to the individual family. I think that's pretty clear in community action. We're supposed to, and a lot of agencies obviously do, but not all of those. We want to link and associate those services to the expected outcomes, right? That's the whole point of it. Not just the service itself that we're reporting, but which services produced which outcomes. That is the fundamental basis of what we're trying to do. That is the essence of a logic model and theory of change. I'm assuming most people attending today have had some Roma training, so you probably know what I mean. And then what we need to do, and this is where the accounting and the fiscal department, so I'm hoping that folks who are attending today either have some of that skills or will be able to bring to the table as we think about how to implement this model, people who are familiar with the accounting side. So we're talking about developing unit costs. That's fairly straightforward. That's accounting. Where it gets kind of exciting, but also hard, is how do we assign a value, a dollar value to an outcome? So that we will talk about. All right, so module 2, what is an investment? How does investment apply to delivering human services? I think most everyone is familiar with the work of Peter Drucker. He's fundamental to Roma. He no longer with us, but he is credited as sort of the, lack of a better term, the creator of modern management. And what was most interesting is in the last 15 years of his life, he really devoted that same intellect to the nonprofit sector. He referred to them as social sector organizations. And he and a woman named Frances Hasselbein, essentially resurrected the Girl Scouts years ago and turned it into what is a very viable service organization for young girls, young women today. So what Drucker talked about is social service organizations, primary, have to think through very clearly what are the results for their programs and services. You need to know that. And then because we're grant driven so much, think about it this way: is this a responsible organization worthy of my investment? That's what grantors do. They're investing, right? And the question is it a worthwhile organization? And the third thing from Drucker's thinking is that the agency itself should hold itself accountable for performance inside the organization. That's the essence of the business model. And that's something that, again, we don't do as well as we could. So we want to be able to raise the bar for our own accountability. And look at the word performance. It's not just that we did the work, but performance implies how well are we doing it. So here it is, 1993, Government Performance and Results Act. So we're going back now, what, 22 and 30 years ago, 29 years ago, GEPRA. And if you look at this, in many ways, that piece of legislation was so absolutely crystal clear. There's a word for word out of GEPRA: express goals in objective, quantifiable, measurable form, describe operational processes, skills, technology, etc. And look at the last three: establish performance indicators to be used in measuring or assessing relative output, service levels, outcomes. I wish I'd written this, I didn't, I just put it in here. Provide a basis for comparing actual program results with established performance goals, and describe the means used to verify and validate measures. This is a checklist. I think every manager or organization should post this on a wall, because ultimately you cannot get to return on investment or social return on investment without these essentially activities, functions being in place in the agency. It's impossible. All right. So what do we mean by an investment? Again, coming out of the business world. So essentially an investment, and I'll just read this, as an asset or item purchased with the hope that it will generate income or appreciate in the future. Pretty broad description. So a couple of examples here. One, you build a factory, okay, and you produce goods, you sell for more than the factory, that's the investment. Or someone goes to college or university, investing in one's own future in the economic sense. But I added the caveat, although that may be changing, as you probably know, there is movement today to really increase people's skills, technical skills that may not necessarily need a college degree. But I think the idea is the same, you're investing in education. Another one, reductions in government spending, increasing competition, increases an opportunity to demonstrate to our stakeholders, the elected officials, legislators, public, how human service organizations spend their funds wisely. Without weighing in on the current political scene, I think that that is critical for us to be much more aggressive. I used to say assertive, but I think we need to take and sort of, be able to demonstrate this in a way and push back on some of the stuff that people who know less about our industry tell about us. And essentially what we're talking about is, in our own way, recasting, rethinking, reformulating return on investment from a business model to having utility in human services. So there's a lot on the table here. Again, this is an orientation. Hopefully this begins as the project and we'll actually begin to do this. So just bringing Roma back for a moment. Again, Roma results in management accountability. We know you get that from participation in a program. And this is a refresher, 3 types of, or groups that each have their own outcomes. For family, we know stability, security, well-being. The agency is capacity, the ability to deliver the services, and in the community, the ability to mobilize public and private resources, help low-income persons, that type of stuff, improve community infrastructure, et cetera. So let's take a look at a little more deeper dive here, and that is language that we use and think about. We're sort of borrowing this, okay? So we talk about what goes into it, the inputs. Some of these are in the logic models as well. What are the outputs, right? It's the services divided by the cost. That's how we get the unit cost. We'll go through that. And as a reference, there's a question 5 in the Frederick-Richmond methodology, but I'll get to that later. And then the last part, of course, how do we make a difference in people's lives? So we are crosswalking and building as a foundation on some of the Roma tools that are available. So why do we want to know the cost? Okay, well, it might be helpful to know that maybe we could reduce our use of a services and still deliver the same results or outcomes by comparing services, right? That's something that we can do. Can we do something not affecting the quality, but if we can produce the same service at a lower cost, there's more funds around for other uses. Second one, again, is that comparison, compare different services and the costs, better outcomes. So it gives us the tools to actually analyze and understand how that works. There might be an example, and we'll have one in a minute, of a higher cost services might deliver the results required more quickly, making the overall cost cheaper. In other words, you're investing in something that's higher in the beginning, but it may be producing better results over the long term. And this part I've always been amazed is that a lot of times people perceive services are free. Well, we know that the clients or the customers themselves may feel that way, and they need to realize it's not free, but also a lot of organizations too. We can make a referral to another agency. It doesn't cost the parent agency a dime, but at the same time, someone else is paying. So there has to be some change in the mindset a little bit that services are not free, whether they're provided by referral, subsidized by grants. There is a real cost, and that is somewhat fundamental to the political discussions that are going on today about the cost of these services. So the bottom line is we need to know these costs and factor them into our service delivery system. All right, so let me take a 2-second break here and ask if there's any questions. Get a picture so I can see everyone here for a moment. Anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, it's going to be quiet right now. That's okay. All right, I will continue on. Thank you. All right. Oops. Okay. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about terminology, and we're going to talk about types of investment. And there are some differences between what we call ROI, start using return on investment, and when we add the S, social return on investment. So again, we bring back that connection is what is the connection between investment and results? And again, I take the Drucker part, worthiness. Is this a responsible organization worthy of my investment? Does my investment produce or yield worthwhile results? On a personal note, I will make certain charitable deductions to organizations I believe are good stewards of the money, and there are other organizations that I know are not as good a steward. So it does affect my behavior of how I make a personal donation. So SROI gives us a standard for accountability measurement, and this is important, and this is really the Roma piece there, why it was module 8. Essentially, if we have all the ingredients to compute a social return on investment, then we can have confidence that our accountability efforts are adequate. I want to emphasize this because what we're saying is in order to calculated SROI, we need to know our services, who gets the services. We need to know what outcomes are expected. Okay, all of those things that go in there. So if we can essentially analyze and turn the data that we collect into information. Remember, data in many ways, numbers, words. It's when it's organized and analyzed that it becomes information. We would know that if an agency essentially can do a SROI, it's a pretty good bet that they have their act together. And that's, how I see it at least. All right. So there's some materials obviously out there. Some of these go back a way, but I found them just as relevant, and obviously some things I've updated. There was again, I think those links still work, what we call the social investment rating tool. That was a way of, and I think I have a reference earlier, or I can always send folks a link to something if you reach Lawrence later on. But the key here is to get donors to think like investors, like I just mentioned. Okay, so the charitable donations become a social investment, and there are risks and responsibilities. I think we're aware that there is a certain element of that. One of the things that I think goes, and if you look at the Charity Navigator and other publications, they do look at the percentage of donations spent on overhead costs. So essentially, what we don't know is the bottom line is whether the charity is doing any good. Okay. Years ago, I sat on the United Way panel, and this is really years ago. And I remember thinking that the way that United regional group, the money was distributed by who knew who. And I remember making the sarcastic comment that they would have been better off opening the window and throwing the money out the window to reach the people than the way they were doing it. So that was a problem. And I remember working with them, and eventually I resigned from the group. Now that organization today is different leadership. That United Way is a well-run United Way, but there's all of that goes into overhead costs, things like that. All right, third one, you're a donor, and by donor, we could talk about a grantee, public funded. Donors don't have a good way to distinguish between an organization does the work they're interested in and a great organization that accomplishes the results that they're interested in. How do we know? We need some kind of objective tools. And frankly, these need to be visible. They need to be transparent. So let's compare and contrast here. Return on investment, pretty straightforward definition. In the business world, right? A for-profit business, it's always expected that a for-profit business will provide a profit or monetary return in excess of its costs. That's your return on investment. Our world, a little bit different. We're not expected to generate a monetary profit, and at times must deliver a necessary service for the common good, regardless of the cost relative to the possible value of the outcome. So that's why the word S is in front of it. It gives us a certain flexibility and leeway. So here are some truisms. All services should produce a measurable outcome. All outcomes have a value, but the value may not always be monetary. So keep that in mind. That sort of gives us flexibility. There has to be a real outcome. The outcomes have a value, but it may not always be able to be portrayed in monetary terms. An ROI is a rate per dollar. So basically, it's dollars put in, dollars come out. So when you make a true return on investment, how many dollars did I invest or spend? How many dollars did I get back? That's not always true in our world. We also talk about cost benefit or benefit cost. A way of thinking about it, just as an example, is GEDs. It is a benefit per dollar, right? What did it cost to produce a GED? How many GEDs were produced? So essentially, what we have to do is essentially create our own path here. And we associate a benefit to a dollar value. I'm on the fourth bullet, but we need to expand our definition. And this is key, from the individual investor to society at large. So going back to the dollar to dollar, in a true return on investment, the people putting the dollars in get the dollars back. In social return on investment, the dollars go back to society at large, sometimes to the individual or the organization, but we're expanding that as to a social good. So that gives us that flexibility. So again, borrowing this from the web, SROI measures change in ways relevant to the people or organizations that experience or contributed. It assigns monetary values to represent societal, social, environmental, economics outcomes. But it is built on that traditional logic of cost benefit and putting those values in, but recognizing that the monetary terms may not always be easy. I do want to point out that where we can, and we'll again, I know a lot of this is kind of just words on slides. You'll see some real examples in a few minutes, that I think we try to do our best to present it in monetary terms, because people expect some of that, as well as depends on where you want to go. So a very simple little graphic here. Return on investment is just a dollar sign, but as you can see here, social return brings in the people and the dollars, and the tree would be the environment. So it is an expansion of what we do. It is really a unique tool that we can use, frankly, to our advantage here. So let's take a look at a step-by-step process here. So how does SROI convey impact? Well, one thing we do know is that all nonprofits, and by definition, local government, if you are subcontracting, though in some cases, local government also directly delivers services. So we all collect data. We've been collecting data for years, and frankly, community action has been quite successful in holding itself accountable and collecting useful data to turn into information. So what a good organization wants to do is turn that data into messages and images that win over supporters. There was a guy named Philip Kotler, along with Drucker, who actually introduced the word marketing into human services, and people were kind of upset. What he was saying is that let's do a good job and tell everyone that you did a good job, but do it in a way that you are solid, that you can support your findings and things like that. So what I like about SROI is you got a double bottom line. You have a financial impact, and you could also have a social impact. You really get two big pieces there. So, and sometimes we undervalue the social value or the social impact. So part of it to think about is what happens in SROI if your organization did not exist to help out. And I'm sure we could think of examples of that. Okay, so some particular illustrations here. Okay, there's your person. And if we do nothing in this particular model, 100 people will cost the public service system $7 million. In other words, these are folks, and again, these are, again, for the illustration purposes, by doing nothing, there's a cost to society. But if we intervene, and in this, again, hypothetical model, that the cost to change the same lives would be 2.7. So what we're saying is, if we invest 2.7 million, it'll save us 7 million if we did nothing. That's sort of a very broad piece. And again, the idea here is this is a template. This is something that if we can use something like this and adapt it to what we do, this would benefit who we are. Another illustration, okay, called Give Mentoring Hand, a strong return on investment. So as you can see here, obviously there's a hand. And you can see in this case, benefits per youth in the state of Minnesota was a mentoring program. They obviously have a methodology that supports these numbers. These are the final products, probably 200 pages of text, and then you have the graphics. But the point is they're showing a couple of things. People served, the outcomes are right there with the fingers. And then on the right side, thumbs up, total benefits per youth, 7,426. And again, I will show you later into the slides how these things actually work and how you calculate them. All right, so again, a couple of terms here. And think about community action now, right? We get funded and we create a program. Some of those things we're quite good at. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking dollars and we are creating a program, and that is essentially creating economic value. And we know that we do that. Community action has multiple funding sources. You pull those together, you come up with a program. Let's look at another example, social value. When resources, inputs, process are combined to generate improvements in the lives, et cetera. And this is where most of nonprofits are. A good example is Head Start, right? It works with parents, it works with kids, it works with education, it works with childcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Breaks the cycle of poverty, et cetera. So there's a social value. what we really want to do is do both, right? We want to get the social economic value. So we want to build on the foundation of pure economic. We want to build on the foundation of social, and we can enhance and increase value. We call it socioeconomic, by taking those resources, inputs, increasing the value, and generating cost savings for the public system or the environment of which the entity is a part. So an example here, which we don't think about, is weatherization. Okay, and I have another example coming in later about weatherization. So if we're talking about a true ROI, we know that if we put dollars into weatherizing a house or fixing what's in the house, we can lower energy bills. So that's $1 per dollar, right? Dollars in for weatherization, dollars saved by reducing energy expenditures. If you look at the benefit cost, we compare those same dollars for weatherization, but we measure by a reduction in kilowatt hours or the number of homes that reduced energy. So we pick up a benefit cost. Where to me the SROI comes in is that we add the first two bullets, right? We have the weatherization in terms of the dollars, we have the reduction of energy, but what also happens with weatherization? We can repair existing properties, we make them more livable. You might increase the value of the tax base. You can allow people whose homes are safe to raise families, if they're older, age in place, and overall reduce the energy footprint. So there are many ways of thinking about this. And personally, I think we should just think with an open mind. I've worked with a lot of weatherization people. One thing the weatherization does well is they know how to measure. That's what they do. They measure, they put it in. I'm talking about the engineer, the people with the trucks who come in. But the point is we have to think about from the socially economic value end that it's more than just fixing a furnace or putting in a window. It has a greater societal, especially when these funds could be at risk. There's a lot of folks in Washington don't see the value of these programs. Here's another example, okay? So what you're looking at here, again, this would be a summarizing page. Obviously, the work that got to this point would have to be there. But again, it's a graphic. And you'll notice here that they put in the economic impact and benefits. There's your number, 265,000. You look at taxpayer savings. I mean, again, these are somewhat buzzwords, but they're important because we use them to our advantage. Okay, taxpayer savings, reduce homelessness, reduce criminal incidents, reduce unemployment. You have on the bottom right, well-being and health, avoidance of teen pregnancy, reduction in mental health issues. And lastly, on the left, we're talking about employment, job readiness, et cetera. So when you add it all up, in this model, the SROI was 879,000. And obviously they have a methodology. And what they're saying is for every $1 you invest in us, we'll produce $2.79 in savings in those 4 areas highlighted by the blue circles there. And I think that's important. So again, this is a graphic using to summarize. It doesn't tell you how we get there, and I will show you that. Goodwill, most folks of the Goodwill stores, I went looking for this. This was a wonderful tool. They upgraded it. And what they did on their calculator, they built in a calculator, and they would say, if you can see what they did here, you would donate something. In this case, a working computer. You could see household clothing on top. We'd put a little number in, and I like this model. It's a great model. And what they're saying is that working computer would essentially 5.1 hours of career counseling, and they put a face on there for someone like Toby. So there was a clear relationship in terms of the donation and the impact in terms of being able to produce a service for a customer or client of Goodwill. This one, this link is fresh. They upgraded this recently. And as you can see here, let me see if I can make it a little bigger here. Oops, that wasn't too good. This is where I love to have someone working with me on this. Let's see what I could do here. There we go. You can see in the middle of the page, once again, the clothing, the electronics, the furniture. You look further down and you can see the specific items. So in the case of electronics, they have different type of electronics. There's tax savings, there's tied to the mission, there's environment. So they have upgraded this tool. And frankly, I just discovered this recently. I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it yet, but I will. But the point is, what Goodwill did was smart. All right, they're justifying themselves as just a goodwill organization, but they are a good organization. That's pretty clear. And if you can see this, you have to assume that they're financially in pretty sound shape. Again, another graphic. This one is rather busy. They use the term projected social return on investment. And again, without going into all the detail here, you'll have, again, we're going to post this on the CalCappa site so you can look at it. But the point is this, you have an estimated return per home, $22,000. This is very much of a community model here, but it brings all elements, family, agency, community. So again, it's really an example of how you can take this, build a nice graphic. It reminds me of the National Theory of Change, where we have captured the goals, the principles, the domains, the programs, et cetera, on one graphic. So this one is a little busy, but at the same time, I think it captures what we're trying to say here. All right, I found this one. I thought this was interesting. In Missouri, they have an algorithm that for the first time, what is a given punishment will cost. And we tend to think about it, the term is called smart sentencing. So what they do is they collect the data. It's not much different than an intake and an assessment we do in community action. And if you look at the second bullet, they get the background. And then there is an algorithm that generates, or in this case, spits out recommended sentences for the offender. And the point is that I can remember when I first I was looking at costs in prisons in the United States. And I found that it was either Alabama or Mississippi. They spent about $12,000 a year incarcerating someone. And in Minnesota, they spent about $50,000 a year. So my suggestion was, you're better off committing a crime in Minnesota. You get a better return for the client, for their value. The point is this, there were different types of essentially, for lack of a better term, punishment / rehabilitation. So here's an example where we have to be cognizant of costs. I do not know how far this has gone, this particular model, but again, we are not unlimited in terms of our dollars. All right, this book, again, this was a wonderful book put out in Washington, DC, and I liked it for its methodology. I believe I have a copy of this. So again, we could make sure the link's there, but Lawrence would be available if we get, we could get these materials. So what I liked here was that this particular study raised these questions. What is the evidence? A key word, evidence. Rome is about evidence. What is the key evidence to suggest that nonprofits create a positive return on investment? So that's fundamental, and we should ask that question among ourselves. What is known about the impacts and benefits, in this case, using the word nonprofit, but local government, when we are stewards, right? We're stewards of other people's money. And what information do we have that can substantiate the claim that nonprofits help to strengthen communities? So these are questions that we should hold ourselves accountable, and frankly, should be at the board level as well. All right, so there are three different models here, and again, just for background purposes, the first model here we're calling cost savings to society. Okay, so in the example here, they use the state of Maryland. It costs $25,000 a year for someone who's in the child welfare system, but if you are able to place someone into a good home, the cost is $7,200. So we're talking about true cost savings, and I'm sure we could think of other examples. You can see in the middle of the page, homelessness, violence, literacy, all those things that we can solve and save dollars. So one model is when you're thinking about SROI, is my program producing the cost savings to society? Okay, so take a look at this example here. If we can use a community-based health care center rather than an emergency room. And frankly, some human service agencies are involved in this now. Or when people finish a job training program and do not need the same level of subsidized benefits or none, that job, and they remain employed, we are saving society money. And I think, again, so much of where we come under attack is that people at least pretend to see there's no value in what we do. So I think we have a obligatory role to teach and to educate our folks that are out there. Multiplying impact. Everyone uses volunteers. This is an example. Do we fully value the role of volunteers? Whether it's boards, staff. I mean, we think about things like a food bank, or food distribution is probably the most common one. But I just want to make sure that the multiplying impact, in other words, if we could take, in this case, providing food or other type of services, it goes far beyond because our costs are lower, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just an example, again, multiplying impact. And we're talking about leveraging. Also, one of the things that community action does is you do hard match and soft match for the dollars you bring in that you know can bring in more goods and services. And I want to point out that one needs to be aware of that, and that is economic, and that does go into our model. The third one is what we call strengthening community. And this is where we're talking about people working together, creating new organizations, advocated, involved in a political, I'm not saying in elected, but political in terms of working with elected officials, things like that. So there's a lot of what we call social capital that is created when we're working at the community level. And if we think about it, we, in many ways, in the perfect world, we connect ourselves to each other through nonprofits, profits. We build a safety net, quality of life. We may reduce duplication, find new resources, things like that. So there's a lot there. And again, this is the big picture. We will bring this down to a more implementable stage. Okay, any questions? I realize I'm covering a lot here. Anyone want to jump in? And Pat is saying no. I just see Pat there. All right, thank you, Pat. Okay. Yeah, we'll have a chance to go through this when we're finishing up. Okay, module 4. So let's think about implementation. Okay, now that we have sort of a big overview and again, the big picture, this is will be available. You can look at it yourself and look at the resources. 3 questions. Where do we start? We're going to build on what we already know and basically doing the math, the calculations, because there is a certain amount of this that we have to think about. All right. We use the material from Reg Carter. He's fundamental to Roma. And just again, his background is in there. Some of his original research goes back a while, but it's just as relevant today. He's still around. He doesn't look like that anymore, but none of us do. So, all right. 7 questions. This is, again, if you've taken a Roma class, you'll recognize this. This is our foundation. And I mentioned earlier that if you could do this, it's just taking these same statistics, these numbers, and reformatting them into a different tool, the social return on investment tool. So in my opinion, I think this is the point, is every agency should know how, or should be able to answer this question. How many clients are you serving? We mean unduplicated. Who are they? Basic demographics, characteristics, the services, all the different ones. We need to assign a cost, not a value. What does it cost to deliver those services? Number 5, and we'll go through an example in a moment, is an efficiency question, right? You're looking at the total cost and total services coming up with the unit cost. The hardest one in these 7 questions is number 6. What's the outcome? What happens to the client? And then the thing that Reg Carter did that I thought was unique at that time is that he was the first one to say, what does it cost to produce the result? No one had said anything up to that point. Everyone talked about the cost to produce a service. He introduced number 7. So we are again talking about the application of these 7 questions or any type of, as Drucker would say, social sector organization. In this case, we're talking about community action that delivers services, and these are applicable. So let's take a quick look at an example. This is right out of the Roma. We have 100 clients. Who are they? Well, we have a population of single unemployed women, 21 to 34, have a child looking for work. We give them a package, right? Job readiness, job placement, 90-day follow-up. And we have a budget for that program. We don't have, let's assume we know exactly how we got the dollars. We have $100,000 to spend on 100 clients. So here's your unit cost. This is the efficiency measure. We have $100,000, we divide it by 100, and we know to deliver that service, because whether we succeed or not, this is simply the cost for delivering number 3, that job readiness package. So we will spend $1,000 per person. So number 6 is what happens to the client. Well, we all know that's not that easy to help people find jobs. And let's be realistic here. We found 10 clients, or 10% obtained, and this is sort of the, obtained a full-time job above minimum wage with employer-provided benefits. Now that is a good job, right? Above minimum wage, full-time and employer-provided benefits. So here's the kicker. What does it cost to produce the outcome? And this is taught in Roma. You still spent the $100,000. And this is the hard part that people did not want to really publicly discuss, because people get upset when they see that large number. It cost us $10,000 to produce the jobs for 10 people. That's a fact. And people would not want to report that because they thought they'll never accept that. So again, the second bullet is that it cost us $10,000 to produce a job, now a full-time job for that client. So if we stopped there, we get ourselves into trouble, because there's someone will go, gee, only 10 people got a job and it cost us $10,000. That may not have been the best use of our investment. So essentially at that point, and I'll go back for a moment, that is a benefit cost. That is dollars to produce jobs. That's not a return on investment. That is how many dollars did it tell us to produce jobs? That's a cost benefit or benefit cost. Okay. But the problem is, it's not the whole story. So when we do cost benefit, we're not necessarily looking at the causality of the relationship between the intervention and the outcome. We assume that that relationship exists. So again, if we talk about benefit costs, in this case, we'd go back to those questions, which is question 4 is the efficiency and 7 is the outcome. So if I go back there, 4, the cost, number 5 is the efficiency, 6 and 7 is the outcome. All right. So let's talk a little bit about efficiency and effectiveness. They're not mutually exclusive. So take an example of a company that produced a window unit air conditioner. If you purchased one that was $50 less than the other to produce and sells $50 less, that's an efficiency measure. And you would normally just buy the lower priced unit. However, and we know this by those yellow tags called the EER rating, you might spend less money in the beginning, but what happens is it's not as efficient. So if you look at scenario 1, the less expensive, and you could look at the numbers there, 12,000 BTU of cooling. If you look at scenario 2, the more expensive one produces cooling, a much better cooling. So what we're looking at is the initial expenditure for the higher price one is recouped in terms of reduced expenditures for energy, yielding a classic return on investment at dollars to dollars. So in our world, at what point do we recoup our initial investment, and how much longer does it pay off? And we could think about adapting that language to our world. So when we talk about this costs now, and this is where and this is where I would like to see as this moves along in California, developing the methodology in the work group. So the fact is we need to involve accounting. However it's done, I assume all agencies have an accounting organization of people there. We cannot underestimate it, and cost calculations should include considerations of the following. Well, basically salaries, benefits, a lot of times people don't think about that. Administrative and support services, the value of donations, put a dollar amount on it. And the one that's almost always left out is client benefits, usually not directly provided by the agency. An accountant would look at this, and you need all 4. If I make a referral to an agency down the street and it doesn't cost me a dime, there is a cost. And the Pennsylvania story is one of our premier agencies in Pennsylvania. I asked them, because they were doing a model, and I said, what does it cost to move someone out of poverty? And they gave me a number about $8,000 or $9,000. And I thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to send every agency, their folks, to this agency because they can move someone out of poverty for $9,000. So I asked them how they calculated that. And the answer was, at the time, that is our budget given to spend on the client. So think about the narrowness of that. So then I gave them those 4 statistics in the blue there. I said, can you then monetize this other part? Well, this goes back a little bit, but that 9,000 jumped to 30,000. And that was a learning experience. So they realized that, wow, it is not as inexpensive as we thought, because we did not assign dollars to the costs that are there that we enjoy. So that's a way of beginning to change people's thinking and mindsets, and we need to learn this. All right, so when we do this, again, this is a PowerPoint that is also used in a all-day type workshop. We produce a worksheet like that, which is the same questions. And what we're simply doing is having people, you can see, use your 4 columns, and we'll use this when we start doing the work. You know, what are the programs, how many clients, who are they, and just go down the list. So this is how we begin to fill out that template. So the next part, again, the word investment comes in. So if we're talking about SROI, we want to know about something about the investor. What does the investor want back? And a lot of times people see this as investors. Okay, so the 7 questions you'll see are expanded. That became the Carter-Richmond methodology, because we added the return on investment to the basic fundamental questions. But again, if we're doing this as an exercise here, and we'll do this when we think about implementation, who are our investors? Federal government, state government, businesses, community foundations, fundraisers. So what we need to do is we need to know what people want in return for their investment, and they may not be the same. So again, we would have a simple little table. Who's the investor? Could be an individual, could be an organization, an element of government, foundation. What do they expect in return? Anyone who gets a grant, grants today are much more outcome driven. And what's the ROI scenario? And we'd have to figure that out. So what we call Carter-Richmond, it's basically an expansion of those 7 questions, and we'll go through those 2 new questions. So basically, I added questions 8 and 9 to the original 7, so we could begin thinking about return on investment and establishing value in a service when we can establish a monetary value. And if we can't establish, if monetary value cannot be established, we'd have to stop at 7, but we want to go through 8 and 9. You'll see this now. So essentially, we added these 2 questions. So this is the hardest one of the 9 questions. What is the value of a successful outcome? How do we do it? And that takes some real thinking. And the last one is a calculation. What is the social return on investment? It's basically arithmetic. So we're dividing the value of the outcome by the cost, and we get a number. We could do it for the individual, which is right in the middle of the page, or you can do it for the whole program, which is, again, extrapolated to the total participants. And let's look at an example here. Okay, so if we go ahead, here's our same example we did a little earlier. 100 clients, 12 single women, 21 to 34 have a child looking for a job. We give them that job package, change the numbers a little bit, $150,000 for the program. So again, win or lose, we take that 150,000, we divide it by 100. So it'll cost us $1,500 to deliver that training, deliver the program. Once again, 10 clients or 10% obtained a full-time job above minimum wage. And if we stopped here, we're going to get a cost benefit. 150,000 divided by 10, it cost us $15,000 to produce the result, the outcome, whatever that outcome is, right? Employment. So we know now that 10 successful clients to get jobs, we spent $15,000 to get to that place. So here's the magic of this. What is the value of that job? And this is where you want to be creative, but you also want to be accurate. And these are all conservative numbers. What's the value from a job? Again, hypothetical story here, create an example, $20,000, benefits from the employer, $4,000, earned income tax credit, $3,000, payment of taxes, $500, and reduction or elimination of some welfare or other subsidized benefits, $6,000. So we're saying that the value of that job, when you add up those cost savings, is $33,000, $500 per year. So basic arithmetic. We know that the value of the outcome for the individual is $33,000. The cost of the outcome is $15,000, and the arithmetic or the math is a 223% return. So this to me is the most important part, and it's the liberating part of this. If we extrapolate that to the 10 participants who were successful in those full-time jobs, what we're finding out is that $150,000 essentially leveraged or created a social return on investment of $335,000. And here's the key. This is where I think we can change the thinking about us. We did that with a 10% success rate. And until we could do this, when people would see 10%, they would freak out. They would go, oh, the program failed. Or say, no, you know what, that program did real good. 10% yielded a 223% return. And this is what we need to begin thinking about doing and explaining that to folks. So here's an example using a Roma outcome scale. Again, numbers a little different, but this is what we need to begin to think about. We have a scenario at the top. 100 clients were enrolled in the Community Action Family Self-Sufficiency Program. The total cost, again, we did our due diligence here, salaries, direct, indirect costs, were pretty solid for $600,000 to run that program. We have 100 families participating. So now we're going to use a scale and we're going to adapt it to an SROI. So let's look at the first one under thriving. And if those of you may not know, the Roma scale is the benchmarks are on the left. We go from in crisis to thriving, and we associate terms when we do assessments of clients, or it could do also for agencies and communities. So there's our first statistic, 10% full-time employment above minimum wage with employer-provided benefits, et cetera. So let me jump ahead to the next slide here. Here is our footnote. And again, in my entire career, I have never been challenged I've never lost a challenge because I've always had this additional material to show that I didn't make it up, that I thought it out. So as you can see here, here's a methodology. If you look in the middle column, I have come up with a way of identifying salary and employment benefits for those 5 benchmarks, and we'll go through that back in a minute. So those are the actual value of the job. And then I'm looking at subsidized benefits. I'm valuing the subsidized benefits, and I'm using that to make my argument about savings and reduction. So if I go back, we find out that, remember, there were 100 people. What happened to those 100? We want to account for all 100, not the 10. Well, we find out that 15 of them, while they didn't hit the top, expected outcome of full-time above minimum wage with employer-provided benefits, turned out there were 15 folks that had full-time above minimum wage with employer-provided benefits, but they did not lose. They still maintained subsidized benefits. So using the value on that other page, we added up. You can see here that the 16,000 wasn't the same savings. It wasn't the same type of job, but it still brought us 41.4, and that 41.4 is still a positive return on investment. And our last group above the prevention line is full-time at minimum wage, no employee benefits, receiving some. And again, even though it's much less, the 50,000, we're at 48.19. So basically, we're talking 60 people obtained some sort of employment, but the ROIs all varied. But we also had 40 folks that did not succeed in the way we hoped they would. We had 15 part-time jobs, and we had 25 people, and I used the baseball metaphor here, they struck out, unemployed and full benefits. So essentially, that last group, it's costing society, however you want to look at it, a full 20,000 here. And by the way, that's a negative return. That cost us 20,000. That's a negative return vulnerable, 91.25. So the point is this. Even with folks that didn't succeed or succeeded on a limited basis, when we add up this whole thing here, we're still coming away with $751,000 in gross ROI compared to 600,000 spent. So the fact is, we still had a positive return on investment. Okay. Okay, I just opened up a chat and had to leave. That's fine. All right, moving ahead. Yep. Okay, so when we looked at the end of it, again, that 25%, I'm going to jump from the tree or rooftop and say we did 25%. We did fantastic. Right. $1.25 you invested in agency A, excuse me, $1 invested in ABCA will return you $1.25. That's pretty good. And you got to think about it that way. So let's take a look at some real case studies now. All right. So we talked about, again, our 3 types: cost savings and cost avoidance. So we want to show dollars, and then the increased income and revenue in terms of we call revenue income generating. All right. This was a project that I was involved in Family Resource Center, Coastal in Chester County, Pennsylvania. It's outside of Philadelphia. What was most amazing about this is when I was working in this agency, no one told me about this program. I stumbled into it, and they had hired a public health nurse, and on her own, she started to collect the data. I couldn't believe it. It was fantastic. This was a community where a lot of these young kids were really sick with asthma. And I have a child who I grew up with who had asthma, and I know what it's like to be in an emergency room or to be scared to death because of an asthma attack, and they can be quite serious. So in this case, we used her data. We obviously worked with her on this. She showed that she developed a training program that would teach parents when an attack was coming, how to prevent a major attack with a nebulizer or other things they did, the education. And they literally, now this goes back a few years, the dollars are a little bit lower, but she reduced emergency room visits from 5 to 2, which saved an annual cost of $13.50 per child. She had crisis physician, by coincidence, also 5 to 2, and that saved $114. So we're looking at, by her intervention in a preventive health care program in the Family Resource Center, they saved about $14.64 per kid. So okay. When we looked at her salary and all the benefits, and divided up by all the children she had seen, it would cost $252 to deliver that services. So essentially, that's generating, when you take off the $14.64 minus the $252, that intervention at $252 is leveraging $1,212 per child. And when you add it up, again, this is for quick demonstration. When you added it up all together, she saved $83,000 and a cost of $69,000. Okay, that was just pure dollars. So here is plugging into our formula here. The cost of the outcome was $252. The value was $464. And essentially, when you do the division, you compare the value of the outcome to the cost. We made the argument that for every dollar spent on preventive asthma care management resulted in a savings of $580 in crisis emergency services. The reason why we put this under social return is that the agency doesn't get this money back, society gets this money back. That's the difference. Again, a true return investment, the investor gets the dollars back directly. In this case, the agency did not, but the benefit could have been healthcare insurance, Medicaid, Medicare, however that was done. So this is something I learned. I was a little naive at the time. I started to talk to the parents. I didn't think about this. And this is what I learned from talking to the parents. Number one, they reduce school absenteeism. Imagine we're talking elementary school kids sick. The kid could do their homework. Some of these children were repeating a grade with the social implications of failing and not being able to compete or be with their peers. A bunch of mothers quit working. These kids were so sick. So lost income. And then you have the last two: improve physical and mental well-being of the child, improve physical and mental well-being of the family. When this was done, I purposely left it like this. We did not know as much about SROI at the time, but this is the perfect tool, is what is the value of reduction in school absenteeism? You can assign a dollar. What's the dollar value? This is pretty straightforward, of the child not repeating a grade. So what's the cost of a year's worth of schooling? How about the value of the income generating for the mother return to the workforce? So this is the social piece. At least the minimum we have to do is to get this out there and show people that our programs and services did a lot more than they think. And if we can, the gravy is to put the dollars and cents to it. And I think that's what we want to do. Okay, this one, our organization, Center for Applied Management Practices, we ran this project ourselves. We were contracted, it was called REACH, which is the Residential Energy Assistance Challenge program. This was a partnership between the Louisville Metro Community Action Partnership, the community action agency that is Louisville, Kentucky, and the city of Louisville ran the weatherization program. We were brought in to help run the program as well as to run a simultaneous evaluation. And we did have the SROI on our mind, so we did this. This was funded, by the way, through the Kentucky Association of Community Action, essentially the parallel to Cal Kappa. So it was the association that was very much involved in this. So we had 4 goals that we were trying to achieve. We wanted to minimize the health and safety risks that resulted from high energy burdens on low-income individuals. We wanted to prevent homelessness that result in inability to pay energy. We wanted to increase the efficiency of energy usage, and we wanted to target energy assistance to individuals who are most in need. These were the 4 goals of the program. We had 150, in this case, everyone in the program was a homeowner, low income, so 150 people that own their own homes. And the criteria was they were LIHEAP eligible, they had to own a home, they had high energy usage. And what we were trying to do in the beginning was we didn't realize who our population was until we recruited. We had built in a sweat equity provision where we were basically teaching folks on themselves on how to use energy better, do some physical, rehabilitation, nothing major. But when we learned that the majority were elderly or disabled, we dropped that requirement. Obviously, it would have been really not doable. Interestingly, 144 folks of the 150 went through the duration of the program. They all received case management consisting of in-home energy education and counseling. A lot of this was about, being good energy stewards. The weatherization provided was a home inspection. They were very generous in terms of materials, equipment, supplies to reduce the usage and costs. And the other thing is improving the overall livability of the home and preventing homelessness. So what actually happened? Here's our data. All clients remained in their homes. No one lost a home. And by the way, these homes were older Victorians in a historic section. Majority of owners were African-American women. And obviously, it was important to maintain the historic as well as keep folks in their own home and also to showcase a community and neighborhood. What we found is 59% experienced a decrease in usage of energy and 45% energy usage and costs. We estimated that they saved $15,000 in that year. No one had a utility shut off. There were no arrearages. And as a result of that, again, you don't think about it this way, but 54% of the folks increased their household income because they weren't spending extra dollars on energy going out the window, so to speak, or getting better, in terms of quality. What was interesting and important here, again, we did not think about this. Peter Drucker, in one of his sayings, always goes, talk to the client, talk to the customer, they know. Well, again, we began talking to these folks and they were very clear. They said that the difference between a lot of them moving into an assisted living or a nursing type facility where they could get supports is that their houses were made energy safe and they were livable. And what we did is we did a simple check and we looked at the cost of an assisted living could have been $1,500 to $6,000 monthly in Louisville. And essentially by maintaining a person in their home, there's your social return, we could realize that social return on investment. So what we estimated is that if we took the folks that could have been essentially relocated to a different facility, even if we looked at just 10 folks at about $2,000 monthly, we would have saved $240,000. The thing that we also learned, and these were large homes, we forget that 2 or 3 generations ago, it was not unusual for people to live together with intergenerational household. Grandparents, parents, grandkids, that was frankly pretty normal. What we also learned is that in many of these homes, there were adult children with grandchildren. And if you think about it, think about the multiplying effect, the impact. If a home would be lost And you would not only lose the placement for the homeowner, you potentially would lose the home for the family and the children. So the other thing too is in terms of the community, the neighborhood looked nice. These homes were good. There was good standing, safe, affordable housing. This was a fun project to work on. It was motivational and it was doable. And again, you're using an existing program because LAHEAP is seen as just paying energy bills or weatherization, fix it up, blah, blah, blah. There's real positive impact on these type of programs. So the end of it is that these programs increased in value, quality of life improved in the neighborhood. And if you increase the value of the homes, you increase, future, property taxes, et cetera. So this was a really solid program. It was a good program. This one, Bayard Enterprises, again, we worked with them. Again, full disclosure, we also are the software people there, but we use our consulting. They came up with a program called Denver Dayworks, and they received CSBG. In Colorado, there's only 2 community action agencies. The other 30 or 40, they're municipalities who in turn subcontract to nonprofits. So that's Bayard is one of those in the city. And what they do is provide work experience. Their target population were people living in tents and on benches. The genesis of this project was a lot of these folks were living in a park in front of the governor's offices. If you know Denver, Colorado, there's a very nice park there. And what they began to do is, this is somewhat of an older, meaning they weren't young kids, it's, middle-aged population. They began to recruit these folks, obviously with the idea of trying to clean up the park, but also very clearly, who are these folks, connecting them to supportive services, food, shelter programs. And the city gave them $400,000 in initial funding. All right, in its first year of operation, these are our outputs: 10,000 hours of work experience, 284 people that were homeless or people experiencing homelessness, 462 were recruited, 350 remained in the program, 284 participated in a day's work, the original goal. So we had 284 versus 150. And by the way, these were not make work jobs, these were real jobs. They did some extraordinary video, the news media did, showing these folks transitioning from living on a park bench. And I got to know some of the customers because we were there, and they'd make the joke that the commute wasn't too long. They'd roll off the bench and get to work. The point is that was not acceptable, and they began to find housing. So if you look at these numbers here, 110 got permanent jobs, originally 49. We expected 30 to maintain long-term employment, 57 did. The placement rate, by the way, was around about 52%. And I remember when that was first covered, people said only 52%. I did research. I couldn't find a single program in the United States that placed more than 30%, and they were at 52%. It was an extraordinary program. So here's the nice part about this program. They were successful. And by the way, just so you know, the city of Denver hired the University of Colorado to evaluate this. They wanted a third-party independent evaluation. They used the data that was on our database that we had worked with them on, and they gave them sort of the good housekeeping seat, So here's what happened. They got funded, and they got funded. And to this day, this program continues to receive funds because it can demonstrate its impact and return on social return investment, and a neighboring county replicated it. So again, a good example of doing these things that actually are within our mission, et cetera. This one is a methodology. At the time, the Department of Community Affairs that oversaw community action was this part of a much larger study, but I just want to bring out the methodology where they asked about the same thing. Can you demonstrate social return on investment? So what we came up with was the big picture. We needed to find out, and again, this might be analogous to what we might want to do in California. What are the dollars for case management? You can see the list here: job training, food stamps, et cetera. So we need to know expenditures, okay, services, interventions for that. For those basic expenditures, we see those as interventions or investments. And then we want to compare that to the value of the return measured by the following: dollars, and again, pretty straightforward, Dollars realized income from employment, payment of taxes, reduction or elimination of food stamps, like, obviously things that we're familiar with, reduction or elimination of emergency services, cash assistance. Now, obviously, these are things that, and again, these could change. California would be perhaps different, but these are the big picture items. This table comes off the cliff effect. For those who may not be familiar, what the cliff effect means, that if you look on the left-hand side, as you make more money in column 1, you lose the benefit in column 2, you fall off a cliff. The reason why I put this in here is to illustrate that we had to come up with values. So if you look at the column on the right, estimated monthly benefit, this is how we generated. Now, this again is something we would do in California, but this told us that what is the value of, say, Medicaid? It's $1,500. What is the value of SNAP? $200. What's the value of energy assistance? So again, it's a way of doing it. And if you looked on the bottom right, again, this is from another project, the estimated monthly benefit of a family who gets Head Start was $3,325. So which is somewhat unrelated. If that's your monthly benefit, and your annual benefit would be what, $38,000. It does bring into question about the issue of the cliff effect, because in essence, there's a disincentive to work if you're going to lose the value of these programs on the right. So that's a whole other area, but it might be something we want to sort of tuck in back of our head just to think about move forward. All right, last module. Module 6, principles and practices, and let's go to work, and then we can open this up for chat. So why is it important? And I think this is our selling piece to ourselves, to other agencies in California, to your referral agencies. We want to have similar standards of accountability for the for-profit, to the public and private. Why not? We are businesses for the most part. We want to demonstrate results in a competitive funding environment. Bayard, I mentioned, got that $400,000 a year. They competed for those dollars, and they got it because they could show the impact in the SROI. We want to show that our human services, the third bullet, generates a measurable short and long-term positive impact. Number 4 is sort of the big picture one. Can we show that a modest success can generate a positive return, 10, 20, 30%? For those of you who know the baseball analogy where we use the baseball cards, if you're batting 333 or 300, you're successful 1 out of 3 times, that's a superstar. And yet if we say 30% in human services, social services, people look at us like we didn't do something right. And the other thing to do is we need to teach people, last bullet, as well as our staff, what are realistic expectations for the numbers of successful outcomes in client level programs? We don't really have those statistics. Okay, when Bayard did that, they began to collect for the first time real employment numbers. And they had to teach the media, because the newspapers and the media thought that 52% wasn't good. When I saw that number, I went back to the executive director and said, you got to educate, which they did, not only the media, but you got to educate your own staff that what they did was extraordinary. This one is one of my favorites. Years ago, a study was conducted in Michigan where they administered the same satisfaction survey to the agency staff who provided the services to the folks getting the services. Again, I was kind of surprised by this, and maybe you would or wouldn't be. When the clients evaluated their satisfaction, they rated the staff higher than the staff rated themselves. Think about that. The staff were more satisfied with the benefits that they receive working with agency staff than the self-assessment of the staff themselves. I used to refer to this as a low self-esteem study. What we need to think about is how can we also take the same data and teach our staff so they have a way of knowing at the individual client level that so-and-so came into me, not only did I get him a job, but I got the SROI impact of that job. So in a way, if you think about it, these are hard jobs, folks who work directly with clients. It's a tough job. And I think when they're doubting their own abilities or their own self-esteem, that affects turnover, morale, etc. So I think we need to come up with a way of sharing some of this on an individual level to feed right back to the staff person to say, hey, you're doing a good job. or if you're not doing a good job, let them know that too. But the point being that we want to be able to show that you're valued in the agency. We know there's a lot of turnover in human service agencies. Can we somehow improve that? Because turnover obviously is expensive, recruitment, et cetera. Couple of cautions. One, populations may not always be able to quantify. You may have a lower SROI than easier to serve. Non-financial factors may outweigh economic value. If you ever did a social return investment on a fire department, a lot of money goes in, but we choose to keep firefighters in their vehicles in case how we need them. But the fact is that we make a decision for society, because a lot of times the equipment, the folks are simply not there because the need is not there, the demand isn't there for their services. We want to be able to get good data, all right? The quality may vary. We want to do pre and post test. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the bringing the SRI to the individual level of the agency staff. Where was the person before? What happened afterwards? And the bottom line is it's an approximation tool. The key for us is we have to put out our methodology, make it totally transparent, and that usually shuts down 99% of the things that people assuming that we're playing tricks. So we want to be able to defend what we have. A few principles to think about: involve the stakeholders, understand the way in which the organization creates change. Each organization does. What are your program services? What do you do differently? Figure out what changes. Okay, what's the change that we expect as with our interventions? We want to value things that matter. Okay, we want to value where we have something similar to what's going on in society, so we don't have to value everything. We want to include only the important things, and again, this is where we would work this through specifically in our own projects. We certainly don't want to overclaim. All right, there's enough good stuff in what we do in terms of our programs that I think we should be able to find sufficient programs and services that would lend themselves to SROI analysis. We want to be transparent, and we want to verify the result. Okay, so in the case of when the university was hired by the city, because the city didn't want to be embarrassed, frankly, and they wanted to know the city. Think about it, was the city of Denver. They were the investor. They really asked the right questions. Is this agency worthy of my investment? That's the bottom line for the city of Denver. And they hired the university. The report's really quite amazing. And there it is. And the result is, of course, everyone is happy in that sense. And by the way, the other thing they did that was fascinating, I don't quite know how they did this, but a van would come at the end of the day. I'd be in the agency in Denver, and a van would pull up with the individuals, and they give them $75 cash. Right? Wasn't reported. They gave each person a day. They were making $75 a day, and then they would see what they spent it on. Overwhelming majority spent it on stuff that they needed: activities, daily living, rent, food. So in a way, they treated people like adults, gave them the cash. And it was quite amazing. It was, again, to have fun doing a research project was pretty cool, very enjoyable. All right, so the last part of this is, what can we do as a network, California network? Well, what we can do, and this would be the next steps, identify services and expected outcomes common to the agencies in California. Our tools, our CSPG plans, or the MPI reports. We want to come up with a uniform methodology for determining unit cost for services and establishing average cost in the network. So again, the key is average. What is the cost for a unit of case management? What is the cost when I, make a referral, things like that. We want to identify the third one, identify monetary where we can for the outcome. If it's non-monetary, like in the case perhaps in Louisville, where the person maintained in the home, the value in the community, we could estimate that. And number 5, we want to market our results. We really have an obligation to educate the public, funders, elected officials, and our own staff. This stuff is really important for our future. I could make a very passionate argument why we should go ahead and give everyone guaranteed minimum income, or uniform, the term, or guaranteed income. in lieu of an agency. When you think about the cost to run an agency, it's significant. And there's a movement to do that. So we have to show that investing in our organizations provides a better return than giving someone a check each month. And we have an obligation, I think, to do that. All right, I think this is the last slide. Where do we go from here? And I'll turn this back to Lawrence and everyone else here just for discussion. Identify agencies that might be willing to participate, as well as staff. Develop a work plan, a work group, and a timetable. Identify programs for developing the SROI scenarios, developing the calculations and the models, and sharing the results of the pilot with the network. This has potentially national implications as well, because if a large state like California begins to think this way, others are going to want to do it. I see a raised hand here, and I'm going to stop the share here so we can look at each other again. And again, whose hand was up? Linda. Is your hand still up there, Linda?
It is. Thank you.
Sure.
This is excellent, Frederick. We've actually been talking about a social value to weatherization for over 30 years here in California, when we started weatherizing homes funded by utility companies. And, you know, there was always the complaints to the PUC about there being no, you know, the costs just were dumping money. And, but where we ran into a brick wall was in quantifying the information. So you put forth a lot of great procedures and processes to do that. The thing that hits me, and I think that for CSBG, this is excellent. But I think we've got a bigger hurdle here in California with the Department of Energy, the DOE bill program coming through, that's going to dump a ton of money here in a state where we can't seem to make the REM audit tool that they provide us to use. We can't make it work in a lot of our housing stock. And I think that if there was a social value put into that audit tool, we could make these houses pencil out a lot better. So I would like to see us exploring that possibility.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what I'd be happy to do. There is a published final report, and I'd be happy to send this to anyone. I mean, you'll see our methodology, you see our charts, our graphs, our tables. It's a book that we basically produced.
Nice.
And so if you want to steal it, just give us credit and then you can steal it. Okay, will that work for you?
That'd be great. Maybe if you sent it to Lawrence, he could
Lawrence, I think I did send it to Lawrence. Did I send it to you? No, I'm not sure, Lawrence. I sent it to you or not. No big deal. I'll resend it if I didn't send it.
That
So,
would be awesome. I think
yeah.
we really need to work on something like that so that we can quantify and justify what we're doing over here. The problem with DOE here in California is the focus is more on heat savings, you know, and they don't have a good cooling factor savings in the
Right.
equation. And, you know, that's something we'd love to be able to cut loose, but we haven't been successful in doing so. But I think that the social benefit, I mean, not only for DOE, but the utility programs, CSBG, this is excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That's really nice to hear. I mean, this report has been, you know, I mean, I've shared it over the years, and to me, what was so rewarding was the impact was all over the place, from families staying together, right? Families not losing homes, fixing a neighborhood, being warm in the winter. I mean, it was extraordinary. So I will send to Lawrence, and again, I'll send it with the appendices. And Lawrence, feel free to share it. That'd be great. Thank you, Linda. So anyone else, or Lawrence, any thoughts? Jim, you're usually talkative.
I'm glad you're reviving this. I was trying to remember that there had been some serious conversations about this in the early days of developing the Roma curriculum. And
Right.
I can't remember why we didn't proceed with it. What did we think it was just too much for the network?
It was too much. Yes, exactly. I mean, I continued to do it as an independent, module, but here's the thing. At that time too, I think about the difference. People would have to attend a training somewhere, or the trainer would come in. So you're giving up 3 days of work. Agencies were okay with 2. It's conceivable we could have shrunk it down, but I guess our feeling at the time wasn't just me alone, that that basic core was needed, and the return on investment was sort of the gravy at the end. And
Yeah.
I think, in retrospect, probably not the smartest thing, but now I think more than ever, it's a useful tool as we talk about. Everyone's looking at cutting costs, whatever that means anymore,
I think you've got fertile ground nationally on this. I think agencies are ready for it,
Well, that's good to hear from you, Jim, about that, because I've wondered about that. People like it. I've never heard anyone say they didn't like it, but there has to be a certain discipline about getting the data, organizing it. It takes management and willingness and education. So, that's the hard part in a way, So I would love to see California come up with its own methodology. Really develop a national model. Why not? So I appreciate your thoughts there, Jim. Jim, you're the one who told me years ago, I'll always remember this, at a conference in Omaha, we were both speaking. I said, Jim, why don't we fix all these problems? You said to me?
No, what?
You said, Fred, we're a 10% solution country. We do everything but at 10%. We know what to do, but we just do 10%. And I remember you telling me that. And I thought, yeah, let's raise it up to 30. Then we'll be as good as a baseball player.
Fred, I'd just like to add, as a community action agency working in a county which is competing with over 2,000 other nonprofit agencies. I know that's hard to believe that there's
That
over
many.
2,000
Right,
nonprofit
huge.
agencies in Santa Barbara County. Of course, we live in it's a county where it's a tale of two cities. We have Montecito on one side that's very wealthy. And then we've got a situation which, roughly 1 in 5 individuals are living in poverty. That makes for a very competitive fundraising environment for us. And so one of the questions that I've been asked multiple times over and over again in the last year is, what impact are we having? And not just from a client base approach, what impact are we having on the individual, but what impact are we really having on our community? And those that are potential donors are interested in knowing what kind of impact we're having in terms of cost savings in our community. And so, and I think that's what Congress is looking for as
Yes.
well, from a network that's been serving low-income individuals for over 55, almost 60 years. They want to know what impact we're having, not only on the lives that we're serving, but on our communities, and what kind of cost savings is that resulting in. Here in Santa Barbara County, my board chair is CEO of SynCal Health, which is essentially a public, it's a county organized health system. And what they have conveyed to me is that for every meal that's delivered to a senior, they are saving roughly $7,000 per month in healthcare services. And so they understand that there's a dollar amount. There's a huge return on that investment if we can provide that meal to that senior We're not just looking at proxy outcomes here. We're looking at real dollars saved that we can communicate to potential funders. And I think that that's what our local government is looking for. That's what our state government is looking for. That's what Congress is looking for from us. And that's why, we are so excited about this project. We feel that, as being a partner, on the ground and helping to develop this here at a local level, we believe that we can help to be able to articulate the real dollar value that we're bringing back to our community.
It's a good speech, Pat. I mean, that's exactly right. And you're right about Congress. I think, look, it's a preventive, we have to think of ourselves. I've always described to people who don't know what community action is, I cast it as a prevention program. So when people say that they're stable, I want to say that's fantastic. They're stable because we prevented it from getting worse. And what we want to do is play that. Everyone buys into prevention healthcare. We should come up with a preventive social services model. That's kind of what we do. And we do think, the potential on this for kids in school. We have programs that help kids. Some obviously agencies run Head Start, follow some of these kids, things like that. There's a lot we could do here. And I think we need to go from being assertive to aggressive to simply say, listen, we're sort of tired of people not understanding our industry. And I think that's important. And I like the way you articulated that. And it gives people tools who may be on the fence. Okay. Again, I think the time is ripe for this, given what is some of the funny stuff going on in Washington these days, So, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. And you said 2,000 agencies? That's incredible.
Over 2,000 nonprofits.
Nonprofits. That's well. Look, part of what I think could be done, say in your community, is you become a hub for this. In other words, you could maybe develop it, but this is a way for you to reach out and say, we're going to extend a model to you. You want to participate with us? That could easily be done, and people would buy into it. It makes them look good.
Absolutely, and we want to be a leader here in Santa Barbara County, and I think this can set us all apart from other nonprofit agencies.
Good. Well, I look forward to continuing the good work there.
They're using this model, quasi-using model in homelessness in California. I mean, you hear about how much, fewer emergency hospital emergency trips, fewer spend the night in jail, savings of law enforcement, blah, blah, blah. They've got, and we as a part of the Community Action Network are involved in that. But it's being used successfully, and it's drawing in lots of money. Like in our area, Kaiser and Sutter Health are really big investors in homeless prevention. So I think you've nailed it. I mean, just taking this the full spectrum into the CAAs. I mean, we could definitely stand out in this in California.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole, and I've been involved in this. There's a whole industry with the emergency rooms that have become de facto warming shelters in a place to get a sandwich. Everyone knows that. Now, there've been a couple of demos where, again, this is the 10% solution problem. And they ran a successful one in Colorado where they had social workers in the emergency rooms, and what they did is they would triage it and realize a lot of these folks didn't really need emergency services, right? And what they did is they began to place them in real housing and get jobs. Well, the fact is, the emergency room saved a ton of money, the healthcare providers, but the money didn't go back to the people doing the work. That was the problem, and that's why the SROI is in there. Another one that I knew involved in where people were just dialing 911 and getting ambulances for, frankly, non-medical stuff. So they made a contract with Uber or Lyft, I forgot which one it was. And when the 911 triage nurse would answer the call, they would make a decision whether to send an ambulance with paramedics or an Uber vehicle, where they could bring them to a shelter or a food. It was a very interesting program. So that type of stuff is ours for the taking. I think if we can just create some of those programs, but we got to somehow also get paid for it. That's the problem. The benefits, in many cases, with the insurance companies, with the housing. And the other one that I thought was totally crazy, I just learned about this 2 weeks ago. Apparently Starbucks has put $1 million in. This is what they're doing, is they're hiring, for lack of a better term, caseworkers to go into the Starbucks, because a lot of the folks at Starbucks will buy a cup of coffee and sit there for 8 hours. And this is not helping Starbucks business. So what they're hiring, and the reason I know this is actually it's, you may know her, Joanne McLean, who has done work at PCDD. She's telling me her daughter is being hired, and Starbucks gave the money to a nonprofit in Denver who was she's being hired to actually go in and try to speak with these folks and get them into services. So Starbucks wants to invest its $1 million to save its business model. I mean, it's a really crazy story, but and there's precedent for that. There's on the East Coast, I don't know if anyone's from the East Coast, many years ago, the Horn and Hardart chain was called the Automats. You may or may not know what an automat was, but you go in there, put your nickels in, get a sandwich, and this became, and they frankly kind of went out of business because they became, they were open like 7 in the morning to 11 at night. They were shelters for, a cup of coffee. So there are many of these models that we could begin to toy with and begin to think about and create a niche, for ourselves that, but we also need to talk about the people who spend the money, because you want to get some of this back. I mean, social return investment is a wonderful model, but we need to be paid for what we're doing, Lawrence, anyone else? So I guess the next step would be to take that last slide and put some breath into it, right? So to begin to, there's obviously, I had developed a work plan with Cal Kappa that we could begin to fill out. So I'll leave that for, in terms of finding some agencies willing to participate, finding some staff willing to participate. We do need some fiscal people on this. It'll also be an intellectual exercise in how do we value things. That little model of the Family Resource Center, where this, again, public health nurse on her own set up a database. She wanted to know. That was great. So, I never would have thought about that. And asthma affects low-income children, and, we know that more severely, given where folks live. So, I think also identify what programs, outcomes. In a way, it's sort of like Roma on steroids, right? You want to take it to the next step. And then, like baseball cards, start publishing this stuff. Press releases, getting it out. I used to lobby years ago for Children's Health Services in Pennsylvania. And we would lobby, but we would also have regularly scheduled events in the rotunda in the Capitol where we would show our charts and our graphs, our tables, and smiling faces. We had it all. And that's how we would win the battles. So.
I like it. Sign me up, Lawrence.
That's a good segue, Linda. I was going to suggest that the way that we can participate further after this call, I'm going to package this up and send you the recording, also to the other folks that registered. I'm going to include a simple registration form to sign up to be part of the SROI work group here in California. Okay, so if you would know already that you'd like to participate, great, you can sign up there. If you want to sit on it for a minute, that'll be the form that I'll use to collect interested people for the work group and kind of organize us in that way moving forward. So no real details at this point, but just so far as Fred was, talking about pulling interested agencies together, we'd like to also be sure that we've got if we can, a cross set of agencies across the state. So meaning large, small, rural, urban, public and private, we would just, the more diversity we can get, just the better the data set, honestly. But if you're particularly interested, that's all that's really important at this point, is that, you know, your agency is willing to participate, and then we'll figure out exactly what that means moving forward. Because the kind of data that we collect and the kind of information that we need to decipher, you know, we'll sort that out as we move into it. And Fred's here to help kind of guide us in that process as we move forward. Are there any other questions? I know we've got about 9 minutes left. Or any other questions of Fred or me on how to participate with this kind of a study or a work group?
I have a comment. I wanted to take a moment and say Tracy, our CFO, is also on the call, and we've just been chatting offline about potentially what this could look like. And it might be a suggestion for the other parties to also include your finance department, because they get data that on the programmatic side I don't see, or I may not find relative, but she or the finance department for your program may. So depending on how frequently we meet and what the content is, it might be worthwhile to include a finance and a programmatic, you know, counterpart for each organization. The other thing I'd like to suggest is maybe finding a commonality of programs among the final participating group of the programs that we have in common, because it's hard to do across the board. Instead, I'd like to propose that maybe we focus on one pilot of an energy program. You had, you know, Fred, you had a great slide on how to actually calculate the savings. And if all of us are operating an energy program or something similar, maybe we can all put our energy in what the ROI would be on something like that. It would be hard for us to do it across the board times 17 programs. So I'd like to put my energy on maybe really focusing and piloting it on one, socializing it with the other program managers and showing them that this is working for you and not against you. That would just be my suggestion.
Yeah.
Fred, another thing that agencies have in common would be the cliff effects, the state level cliff effects. Many counties do have a few little wrinkles and variations, but there is a core cliff effects structure in California that would be common to all the counties.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I mean, you know, I remember when some of these great novelists, they say, how did you write the story? And they said they sat down and the story wrote itself. And then they, you know, they were guiding it. So in a way, I think we're a combination of, I think we definitely have to pull out some programs that people are comfortable with. We know we need to bring the people, but I really see some of this as open-ended in a creative process, because I'm not going to dictate in any way. I want to, you know, the same way that so many of those programs that we evaluated, I learned talking to the people who were getting the services. That was important. And I think if we can look at that, and that's the point of a work group, we'll begin to sort this out. And we absolutely do need fiscal, you know, there's no question. I mean, that's you know, somewhere, and I do not remember where, somewhere I did see that some agency, once upon a time, as a public agency, actually develop unit costs, just what we talked about, you know, the vacation, the parking spot, you know, the utility bills, all built in. It was really amazing to see. And that's, again, that's how an accountant obviously would see it, you know. So I think this could be a very creative process, and probably, you know, could excite folks.
I'm the CFO at CapK, and I listen to this, and ROI is completely understandable to me. For your, I don't know if there are other accounting people in this call, but we would need to understand the characteristics of each program in order to be able to give you a model template to be able to calculate ROI. Just because I don't always get to see the elements of service, I understand it very broadly, but when I understand your story, I understand what to pull.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we need to start with getting more people to this webinar. You got another one coming up, Lawrence. And, you know, I mean, maybe all of those on today, you could put a testimonial from us. Hey, guys, come on down. You guys need to participate in this. This is very important to California and our future success in keeping the funds flowing. You know, not just the foundation stuff, but as you said, Fred, the stuff that's going on in DC now. I mean, they're attacking our programs. These,
Yeah.
you know, it's war, the war money or our war money. So, you know, being able to quantify this stuff and show the value beyond, but people need to come and listen to Fred. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Send out 42 reminders. When's the next one?
Well, the next one's in 2 days. And Linda, I do appreciate the offer to send some words of encouragement for your peers. I mean, if you can see how this would benefit, you know, it's one thing for Fred or I to put that out there, and we do. But for you as a peer, to say that, you know, here's why I feel, you know, we should move this forward. You know, that can be very, very helpful in our own outreach to other agencies. And while we have this next one coming in 2 days, that's not to say that those are the only agencies that will participate. We'll have to review and see what folks are interested. So that will help, Linda. Thank you.
Cool. I'll send you something for sure.
Yeah, you know, just as a crazy story, I used to be a COO and then the executive director of a group called Pennsylvania Partnerships for Children. And our board had a vision of a children's healthcare plan that turned out to be CHIP, you know, the original national program. And myself and about 5 others basically came up with it. And when we started to get the data, what happened is the insurance companies were fighting us. And they basically said that, well, it's very expensive. And we had set a dollar amount on a premium that we said that kids don't cost as much and all this stuff. It's a whole other story. But the point was this. We got a hold of the Medicaid. It's a whole other surreptitiously how we did this. We got a hold of the entire Medicaid database, and we found out that a child under age 18 had a 1 in 20 chance of being hospitalized, period. Whereas the premium that the Blues had come up with was basically saying that every kid could be hospitalized. And we were saying, no, if you invest in these inexpensive programs and do all of that. And I remember when we went to the hearings, of course, we didn't tell them that we were going to do this to them. When we said, this is your data, and we showed it to that was the end of it. We won. You know, we had, originally there was no support. We had 100, every single senator in Pennsylvania voted affirmative on that. And that became the basis for the national. Again, my board chair happened to have this friend named Hillary, who was married to this guy named Bill at the time. And so, honest to God, that's what happened. And it was communicated informally and then eventually became CHIP. But the point is, it was data driven. We knew how to market it. We knew how to tell the story. We showed the return, and the Blues lost. And they had all their lobbyists there, and it went nowhere. So it could be done. It could be done. So, all right. So Lawrence, I'll send you the REACH material, and you can share that. And if people can use the methodology, that's fantastic. So Linda, feel free to steal it. All right.
Sorry,
So-
my cursor wasn't cooperating. Thank you. I will. I'll definitely give all the credit due though, Fred. I mean,
That's fine.
yeah, no.
But listen, if you,
I'm thinking of some folks that we can get involved who've been on this bandwagon for a long time over here, but we've just never gotten anywhere with it.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
and it's also very measurable. I mean, it really is pretty. And we also had the cooperation of the utilities. They were good. They gave us the data. You know, we had an agreement with them. Everyone was in it. It was a positive program. Everyone wanted it to succeed. So again, driven by the state association. So
Yeah.
yeah. All right. And so looking forward to working directly and Communify as well as we advance. This would be great. And so we're going to somehow get all those 2,000 agencies under your roof, huh, Pat and David? You'll be the world's largest community action agency. Yeah. Sounds good. All right. I'm good. So I guess, Lawrence, see you on Thursday.
On Thursday. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Is there
And,
another?
stay tuned. We'll see you in the work group.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
Take care,
That's good.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.